The morning rush pulsed through the cafe at the base of the Sterling Tower, a sleek monolith of glass and steel that pierced the city skyline. The air buzzed with the clatter of ceramic cups, the hiss of steam from the espresso machine, and the low hum of hurried conversations. Baristas called out names, their voices cutting through the static of footsteps and muffled phone calls. The scent of roasted coffee beans hung heavy, a warm promise amid the chaos. Elise Harper, 32, CEO of the tech empire housed on the tower's highest floor, stepped inside, her presence unnoticed by the crowd. Dressed in a tailored navy blazer and crisp white blouse, her auburn hair pulled into a low bun, she moved with the precision of someone accustomed to commanding rooms, yet here she blended into the sea of professionals chasing their morning caffeine. Elise approached the counter, her phone in one hand, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. She ordered a double-shot cappuccino, her voice steady but distracted, her eyes flicking to an email notification. The barista, a young woman with a practiced smile, rang up the order. $5.90. Elise tapped her card against the reader. A red light blinked, declined. Her brow furrowed and she tried again. Declined. A faint flush crept up her neck as she rifled through her bag, searching for her wallet. It wasn't there. She apologized, her tone clipped, explaining she must have left it in her office. The barista's smile tightened, her glance darting to the growing line behind Elise. The moment stretched, awkward and heavy, until a quiet voice broke through. A man stepped forward from the side, unassuming in faded jeans and a charcoal sweater. His employee badge, clipped to his belt, read, Noah. Mid-30s with dark hair cropped close and a calm demeanor, he held up his phone to the reader. The payment chimed softly, and the barista's shoulders relaxed. Noah handed Elise her cappuccino, his expression devoid of judgment. She stammered a thank you, caught off guard, but he waved it off with a small shrug, saying it was no trouble. When a splash of foam spilled onto her blouse, he pulled a napkin from his pocket without hesitation, dabbing the stain with careful precision, respectful of her space. He stepped back, offered a faint smile, and slipped out the cafe door before she could ask his name. Elise stood frozen, the warm cup in her hands, the napkin still clutched in her fingers. The queue shifted around her, orders shouted, espresso poured, but the world felt quieter. A stranger had seen her vulnerability and met it with a gesture so simple it disarmed her. She didn't know his story, his role, or why he'd bothered. Most didn't act without expecting something, a favor, recognition, a connection. Noah had asked for nothing. She sipped her cappuccino, the foam still perfect, and headed for the elevators, her mind lingering on the man who'd vanished into the morning. The conference room on the 28th floor gleamed under soft LED lights, its glass walls framing a view of the city stretching toward the horizon. Elise sat at the head of a polished oak table, her sleeves rolled up, a stack of resumes before her. She'd insisted on personally reviewing candidates for the company's new AI-driven logistics initiative, a project she'd championed to streamline operations across 5 regions. Algorithms and HR filters had their place, but she wanted people with grit, not just credentials. The resumes were impressive, Ivy League degrees, polished cover letters, but they blurred together, each one a variation of the same ambition. Her pen tapped against the table, her thoughts drifting to the morning's encounter. She reached for the next file, then paused. The name caught her eye. Noah Carter. Her pulse quickened. She'd seen it before, not in the approved pile, but among the rejections. Digging through the discarded stack, she found his resume, marked with a single red slash. Insufficient recent experience. She read closer. Noah had been a lead systems architect at Vantage Solutions, a firm known for its rigorous standards. 7 years of climbing their ranks, then a 2-year gap with no explanation beyond personal leave. Her fingers traced the page. Vantage wasn't a lightweight company. Their architects were elite. Why the gap? Why the fall to a part-time security role at Sterling Tower? Elise leaned back, her mind piecing together the man from the cafe. His calm, deliberate movements, the way he'd stepped in without fanfare. She opened her laptop, pulling up internal records and public profiles. A news article, buried in a local archive, stopped her cold. 3 years prior, Noah Carter had lost his wife in a car accident. He'd left Vantage shortly after, vanishing from the tech world. The photo showed him at a memorial, his face hollow, a single lily in his hand. Elise's chest tightened. She closed the laptop, her gaze settling on the resume. The red slash seemed to mock her now, a bureaucratic dismissal of a man who'd carried more than most could bear. She grabbed her pen, crossed out the rejection, and wrote in bold ink, "Priority Review, CEO Interview." Her assistant, Clara, entered with a fresh coffee, pausing when Elise spoke without looking up. She wanted Noah's full HR file and a one-on-one meeting scheduled, no panel, just the two of them. Clara hesitated, pointing out his rejected status, but Elise's tone was firm. Not anymore. Later, alone in her corner office, Elise stared out at the city below, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows. Noah's words from the cafe echoed, how he'd assumed she'd do the same for him. But would she? Had she? How many others had she overlooked because their stories didn't fit the mold? The office grew quieter as the day wound down, most employees gone by 6. Elise stayed, her desk cluttered with reports, her mind still on Noah. She thought of his careful distance, the napkin he'd offered, the way he'd left without lingering. A man who'd once led teams of engineers now guarded doors, yet carried himself with a quiet strength that didn't beg for attention. She opened her planner, circling the following Wednesday for his interview. Beneath it she wrote, "Meet Noah Carter. Read the man, not the file." The Sterling Towers lobby gleamed under recessed lights, the marble floors reflecting the soft glow of evening. Noah stood near the security desk, his shift nearly over, his badge clipped neatly to his belt. He'd noticed Elise earlier, her hurried stride as she entered, but hadn't expected her to notice him. Their encounter in the cafe had been a fleeting moment, one he hadn't dwelled on. Kindness, to him, was a reflex, not a transaction. Yet when he received the email summoning him to a meeting with the CEO, his calm faltered. He'd applied for an entry-level tech role, expecting nothing. Now, he stood on the cusp of something he hadn't dared imagine. The elevator dinged, and he stepped onto the 28th floor, the executive level a world apart from the lobby's utilitarian bustle. The air carried a faint scent of cedar, the walls lined with digital screens displaying real-time data. Noah adjusted his sweater, feeling out of place but not unsteady. Elise's office was a glass-walled sanctuary, its minimalism softened by a single potted plant on her desk. She gestured for him to sit, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp, studying him. She opened his file, her fingers tracing the pages as she recounted his history. Vantage Solutions, the awards, the gap. She asked why he'd left so much unsaid in his application. Noah's response was measured. He hadn't thought his past would matter. Most stopped reading at the gap, seeing failure where he saw survival. Elise leaned forward, her gaze steady. If someone had kept reading, what would they find? He paused, then spoke of rebuilding, of choosing purpose over pity. She asked why he'd applied for a role beneath his skill set, why not aim higher. His answer was simple. He wanted a fresh start, earned, not handed. The room grew still, her eyes holding his for a long moment. She slid a folder across the desk, not an entry-level job, but a senior consultant position on the AI logistics project, a role that matched his expertise. Elise's voice softened as she explained her decision. She'd read his file, but more importantly, she'd seen him. The quiet competence, the absence of ego. Noah's expression remained calm, but a flicker of something raw passed through his eyes, a weight lifted by being seen. He accepted the offer with a single condition: he'd buy the next coffee. Elise laughed, the sound light and genuine, sealing a pact that felt like more than a transaction. The transition to his new role wasn't seamless. Noah stepped onto the 22nd floor, his badge now reading Technical Strategy Consultant. The open plan office hummed with activity, but he felt the weight of curious glances. Whispers followed him, speculation about the former security guard handpicked by the CEO. He kept his head down, his focus on the work. The systems were complex, riddled with inefficiencies he could map in his sleep. He studied them quietly, asking questions, tracing data flows with the precision of someone who'd built such systems before. His suggestions were tentative at first, offered in team meetings with a deference that belied his experience, but they were sharp, practical, and impossible to ignore. Elise watched from a distance, her presence subtle but deliberate. A new whiteboard appeared near his desk one morning, unrequested. A high-level software license was added to his account without fanfare. She didn't hover, didn't micromanage, but her actions spoke of trust. Noah noticed, his gratitude unspoken but evident in the extra hours he logged, the meticulous notes he shared. His breakthrough came during a high-stakes review meeting, the room packed with executives and analysts. Standing before a screen, he outlined a flaw in the data synchronization pipeline, costing the company hundreds of thousands annually. His proposed fix, layered consolidation, streamlined protocols, could save 80% of that within months. The room stirred, questions flew, and Noah answered each with clarity, his voice steady, his logic unassailable. Elise, seated at the back, said little until the end. She stood, her presence commanding without effort, and addressed the room. She'd read his file, she said, but more importantly, she'd read him. The applause that followed was restrained but real. Noah gathered his notes, his face composed, but something settled in him, a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. The floor no longer felt like borrowed space. He was building something again, something his. That evening, as the tower emptied, Noah worked late, his screen glowing with code. Elise lingered in her office, her desk a battlefield of reports, her mind frayed from a day of crises, budget cuts, investor calls, back-to-back meetings. She barely noticed Noah until a steaming mug of chamomile tea appeared on her desk, a folded note beside it. "You look tired. The world can wait." The words, written in his neat hand, hit her like a quiet truth. She glanced across the floor, but his light was off, his presence gone as silently as it had arrived. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as the CEO, but as Elise, a woman carrying too much, allowed to pause. The Sterling Tower stood resolute against the city's restless pulse, its glass facade catching the first streaks of dawn. The lobby was quieter now, the morning rush yet to begin, but the cafe at its base already hummed with early risers. Elise moved through the crowd, her steps purposeful, her navy coat draped over one arm. She'd slept poorly, her mind tangled with the weight of an upcoming board meeting and the memory of Noah's note. The chamomile tea, the simple words, "You look tired. The world can wait," had lingered, a quiet anchor in the storm of her thoughts. She ordered her cappuccino, the barista's smile familiar now, and paid without incident. As she turned, her eyes scanned the room, half expecting to see Noah's familiar silhouette near the security desk. He wasn't there. His new role kept him on the upper floors, but she felt his absence like a subtle shift in the air. Upstairs, on the 22nd floor, Noah settled into his workspace, the whiteboard by his desk already scrawled with diagrams and notes. The office buzzed with a different energy now, less skepticism, more curiosity. His colleagues, once wary of the former guard-turned-consultant, now sought his input, their questions laced with respect. He had earned it, not through flash but through precision, his ability to untangle complex systems with a clarity that made the impossible seem simple. He worked methodically, his screen a cascade of data streams, but his thoughts drifted to Elise. Her laugh in her office, the way her guard had softened when he'd handed her the tea. He hadn't meant to cross a line, but something had shifted between them, unspoken yet undeniable. Elise's day unfolded in a blur of meetings, each one a battleground of budgets, timelines, and egos. The AI logistics project was gaining traction, but with it came pressure. Investors wanted results, competitors were circling, and a single misstep could unravel months of work. She carried herself with her usual poise, her responses sharp and measured, but the strain showed in the tightness around her eyes, the way her fingers lingered on her coffee cup during brief pauses. By late afternoon, a crisis erupted. A glitch in the system's beta testing had delayed a critical rollout, and the project team was scrambling. Elise stood in the war room, a glass-walled space filled with tense voices and flickering screens, her arms crossed as analysts debated solutions. Noah entered quietly, his presence almost unnoticed amid the chaos. He'd been reviewing the system logs when the alert came through. Without drawing attention, he pulled up the error codes on a tablet, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen. The issue wasn't new to him. A synchronization lag he'd flagged weeks earlier, but hadn't been prioritized. He approached the lead engineer, a seasoned man named Harris, and pointed out the root cause, a redundant data loop buried in the integration layer. Harris, initially defensive, listened as Noah explained, his tone calm but firm, his solution elegant in its simplicity. The room shifted, eyes turning to him. Elise watched from the head of the table, her expression unreadable, but her attention fixed. By evening, the fix was in place, the rollout back on track. The team dispersed, exhausted but relieved, leaving Elise and Noah alone in the war room. She leaned against the table, her blazer unbuttoned, a rare vulnerability in her posture. She thanked him, her voice quieter than usual, and asked how he'd caught what everyone else missed. He shrugged, saying he'd seen it before, years ago, in a different life. His words carried no self-pity, only truth. Elise studied him, the weight of his past settling between them. She wanted to ask more, to understand the man who'd rebuilt himself from ashes, but the moment felt too fragile. Instead, she offered a small smile, saying he'd saved the day. He shook his head, insisting it was just code, just work. But his eyes held hers a beat longer than necessary. The days that followed blurred into weeks, each one a mosaic of late nights and small victories. Noah's influence grew, not through ambition, but through competence. He mentored younger analysts, his patience a counterpoint to the team's frenetic pace. One evening, he found a junior developer, Lila, hunched over her desk, her screen littered with error messages. She was on the verge of tears, convinced she'd botched a critical script. Noah sat beside her, his voice low, asking her to walk him through it. He listened, nodding, pointing out a single misplaced variable that had cascaded into chaos. Lila's shoulders relaxed, her gratitude silent but profound. From her office, Elise caught the exchange, her pen pausing mid-sentence. Noah's quiet leadership, his ability to see people, not just problems, stirred something in her, a recognition of what she'd been missing in her own approach. Outside the tower, the city cooled into autumn, the leaves turning amber against the gray skyline. Elise and Noah's paths crossed more often now, not by chance but by design. She'd linger near his desk to discuss project updates, her questions veering into personal territory, his favorite coffee blend, the music he listened to on his commute. He answered with the same measured warmth, revealing little but offering enough to keep her curious. One evening, as they left the building together, a light rain misted the air. Elise's car was in the shop again, and Noah offered to drive her home. She hesitated, then accepted, sliding into the passenger seat of his unassuming sedan. The city lights streaked past, their reflections blurred on the wet windshield. The drive was quiet, the radio playing soft jazz, a contrast to the day's intensity. Elise spoke first, her voice tentative, asking about his time at Vantage, about the gap in his resume. Noah's hands tightened on the wheel, but he answered, his words careful. He'd lost someone, he said, and needed time to find his way back. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press, but the silence that followed felt heavier, more intimate. At a stoplight, she noticed his profile, the faint lines etched around his eyes, the weight he carried without complaint. She wanted to say something, to bridge the gap between them, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she reached for the dashboard, adjusting the heater, her fingers brushing his briefly. Neither acknowledged it, but the air shifted, charged with something unspoken. When they reached her apartment, Noah walked her to the door, his coat collar turned up against the drizzle. She thanked him, her voice soft, and for a moment they stood there, the rain a gentle curtain around them. She asked if he'd come in for a coffee, a reflex born of gratitude and something deeper. He declined, citing an early morning, but his smile was warm, his gaze lingering. As she watched him walk back to his car, Elise felt a pull, a quiet certainty that their story was far from over. She closed the door, her hand resting on the frame, her thoughts a tangle of work and wonder. Noah, she realized, wasn't just rebuilding his life. He was reshaping hers, one small gesture at a time. The Sterling Tower glowed under a rare, clear sky, its reflection shimmering in the river below. The company's annual gala was days away, a celebration of a decade of innovation. Elise had overseen every detail, from the crystal chandeliers to the curated menu, but the weight of expectation pressed against her. The gala wasn't just a party. It was a stage, a chance to showcase the company's strength to investors and rivals alike. She moved through her days with relentless focus, but the strain was evident in the late hours she kept, the way her coffee cups piled up on her desk. Noah noticed, as he always did, his presence a steady undercurrent in her chaotic world. He'd taken on a quiet role in the gala's preparations, ensuring the tech setup, lighting, sound, data displays, was flawless. His suggestions were subtle but transformative, like rerouting a power grid to avoid a flicker during the keynote. Elise caught him adjusting a projector one morning, his sleeves rolled up, his focus absolute. She lingered, watching the way his hands moved, precise yet unhurried. When he caught her gaze, he offered a small nod, nothing more, but it was enough to make her pulse quicken. She turned away, chiding herself for the distraction, but the warmth of his presence stayed with her. The night of the gala arrived, the ballroom awash in golden light, the air alive with music and laughter. Elise wore a floor-length emerald gown, its fabric catching the light as she moved through the crowd. She greeted guests, her smile polished, her words measured, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Noah stood near the edge of the room, his black suit understated but sharp, his badge replaced by a simple lapel pin. He'd arrived early, checking the tech one last time, but now he watched her, noting the way her shoulders tensed beneath her elegance. When a chill from an open balcony made her shiver, he draped a soft shawl over her shoulders, his touch brief but deliberate. She turned, startled, but his quiet nod steadied her. As the evening wound down, the crowd spilled onto the terrace for the fireworks. Elise stepped outside, the shawl warm against her skin, the night air crisp. Noah followed, keeping his distance but staying close. The sky erupted in bursts of color, crimson, sapphire, gold, each explosion casting fleeting light across their faces. Elise watched, her breath catching, the beauty a rare reprieve from her relentless world. Noah stood beside her, his presence a quiet anchor. She turned to him, her voice soft, asking why he always noticed the small things. His answer was simple, his eyes steady, because he knew what it was to be unseen. The words landed like a truth she hadn't named, and when he took her hand, his touch was warm, grounding. They stood together, the fireworks fading, the night holding them in its quiet embrace. The city exhaled into winter, its breath visible in the frosted air that clung to the streets around Sterling Tower. The days grew shorter, the skyline sharper against the pale morning sky. Elise navigated her world with the same relentless precision, but the gala's afterglow lingered, softening the edges of her routine. The fireworks, Noah's hand in hers, the quiet weight of his words, they had carved a space in her thoughts, a space she hadn't known was empty. Her office, once a fortress of focus, now felt different, as if his presence had left an imprint. She caught herself glancing toward the 22nd floor, wondering what he was working on, what he saw when he looked at the same data stream she did. Noah, meanwhile, settled deeper into his role. The whispers about his past had faded, replaced by a quiet respect. His desk, once bare, now held a small stack of books, systems theory, philosophy, a worn novel he never mentioned. He worked with a rhythm that seemed effortless, but was born of years navigating chaos. His suggestions reshaped the AI logistics project, streamlining workflows and cutting costs without fanfare. He mentored the team with a patience that disarmed even the most guarded analysts. One morning, he found a young coder, Sam, staring blankly at a bug that had stalled a critical module. Noah sat beside him, asking questions, guiding without leading. By noon, the bug was fixed, and Sam's confidence was restored. Elise, passing by, caught the moment, her steps slowing. Noah's ability to lift others without seeking credit stirred something in her, a reminder of what leadership could be. The project's next phase demanded late nights, and the 22nd floor became a constellation of glowing screens after hours. Elise often stayed, her office a beacon of light, her focus unbroken despite the fatigue-etching lines around her eyes. Noah noticed, as he always did. One evening, as the tower emptied, he passed her office, pausing at the sight of her hunched over a financial report, her hair slipping from its pin. He knocked softly, leaving a mug of chamomile tea on her desk. No note this time, just a quiet gesture. She looked up, her smile tired but genuine, and thanked him. He nodded, already retreating, but her voice stopped him. She asked if he'd stay just for a moment. He hesitated, then sat across from her, the silence between them warm, not heavy. They spoke of small things, the city's first snow, a jazz club he'd mentioned once, the way the tower's lights reflected on the river. The conversation drifted, unhurried, and for the first time in weeks, Elise felt the weight of her title slip away. Noah's presence was steady, his words measured but open, revealing fragments of himself. A childhood spent fixing radios, a love for quiet hikes, the way loss had taught him to see what others missed. She shared, too, hesitantly at first, her fear of failing the company, the loneliness of leading alone. The clock ticked past 9, then 10, but neither moved. When they finally parted, the air felt different, charged with a quiet understanding that neither named. Winter deepened, and the project hit a snag. A data breach in a partner system threatened to derail months of work. The boardroom crackled with tension, executives firing questions at Elise, their tones sharp, their patience thin. She stood at the head of the table, her posture unyielding, but her hands gripped the edge of her notes, betraying the strain. Noah, seated among the team, watched her, noting the flicker of exhaustion in her eyes. When the accusations grew pointed, how could she have missed this? He spoke, his voice cutting through the noise. The breach wasn't her fault, he said, his tone calm but firm. It stemmed from a legacy system his team had flagged months ago, a fix he'd proposed but hadn't been prioritized. He took responsibility, redirecting the room's focus to solutions, not blame. The executives paused, their momentum broken. Elise met his gaze, a silent gratitude passing between them. She took the floor, outlining a containment plan, her voice steadier now, bolstered by his intervention. The meeting shifted, the team coalescing around a strategy. When it ended, Elise lingered, gathering her papers slowly. Noah waited by the door, his expression unreadable. She approached, asking why he'd stepped in. His answer was simple. She shouldn't have to face the fire alone. She studied him, her guard softening, and for a moment the weight of her role felt lighter, shared. The weeks that followed were a blur of recovery efforts, late nights and quiet moments. Elise and Noah's paths intertwined more often, their conversations growing longer, their silences more comfortable. One evening, as snow dusted the city, they left the tower together, the streets quiet under a blanket of white. Her car was still in the shop, and Noah offered another ride. She accepted, settling into his car, the heater humming softly. The drive was slow, the snowflakes catching in the headlights. They spoke of the breach, the project, then nothing at all, the silence, a language of its own. At a red light, Elise glanced at him, her eyes tracing the lines of his face, the quiet strength that had become her anchor. When they reached her apartment, she hesitated, her hand on the door. She invited him in, not for coffee this time, but for company. He paused, then followed, his steps careful, as if crossing a threshold he hadn't anticipated. Inside, her apartment was warm, minimalist, with a view of the snow-draped city. They sat on her couch, mugs of tea between them, the conversation picking up where it had left off. She spoke of her childhood dreams of building something lasting, he of the years he'd spent rebuilding himself. The hours slipped away, the snow falling thicker outside. When she leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his, neither pulled away. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining, and the world outside faded, leaving only the warmth of their shared silence. The Sterling Tower's annual Innovation Summit arrived, a showcase of the company's vision to a packed auditorium of industry leaders, investors, and press. Elise stood backstage, her navy suit sharp, her hair swept back, her nerves tightly coiled. The AI logistics project was the centerpiece, its success a testament to her leadership and Noah's quiet contributions. She'd spent weeks preparing her keynote, but the weight of expectation pressed against her. Noah, stationed near the tech booth, adjusted the lighting with his usual precision, his presence a steadying force. He caught her eye before she stepped on stage, offering a small nod that anchored her. Her speech was flawless, her voice carrying the room as she unveiled the project's milestones and introduced the Second Chance Hiring Initiative, a program born from her encounter with Noah. It wasn't about charity, she said, but about seeing potential where others saw gaps. The audience applauded, cameras flashed, but her gaze sought Noah at the back of the room. He stood by the exit, his expression calm, his pride unspoken. When the summit ended, the crowd thinning, Elise found him in the lobby, the city's lights glittering through the glass. She approached, her steps lighter now, and thanked him, not just for the project, but for everything. The tea, the words, the way he saw her. He shook his head, saying she'd always been the one to make it happen. She took his hand, her voice soft but certain, saying she loved him, not for the grand gestures, but for the quiet ones, the moments no one else noticed. His fingers tightened around hers, his silence speaking louder than words. They stepped outside, the city alive around them, the air crisp with possibility. In the cafe across the street, they ordered coffee, hers with oat milk, his black. The barista grinned, recognizing them, and when Elise's card worked, they laughed, the sound light and free. Over their cups, she asked what might have happened if he hadn't paid for her coffee that day. He smiled, saying they'd have found each other anyway, because kindness doesn't need timing, just two people willing to see.